Hello, welcome to week 7 lecture 35. Today I will introduce you to linguistic typology. So, what I will talk about today is basic introduction about linguistic typology, what it is about, what are the aims, what do we do when we do a typological study. So, we will talk about all those. I will also differentiate between typology and generative grammar. So, in the process you will understand that both generative grammar and typology actually wants to reach the language universals, but then their methods are different. I will also talk about some of the pioneer works on typology and how they are important or why they are important. So, these are the topics which we will explore today in the class. So, linguistic typology searches for language universal, as I mentioned. How? It explores or studies diverse languages. So, one might think how by studying diverse language one can understand about language universals. Because when we study different languages, we know about different structures. When we know about these different structures, then we know that what are the constraints or what are the possibilities and what are the things which are not possible in a language. So, that has to be done when we study different types of languages. If we study same type of language or same language, then we will not understand that what are the possibilities, what are the possible features in different languages of the world. So, diverse languages tell us about different properties of the languages. So, across the world if we study different languages, diverse languages, we can know about the different structures, and in those structures we want to look for the uniformity. So, we want to look at the constraints and possible combinations of these properties of the languages. So, when we are studying say 100 different languages, in between those 100 languages we will try to find a pattern. So, these languages can be totally different from each other, but then a typologist's job is to find the pattern, the commonalities between all these languages. So, commonalities does not mean that they will have similar feature or same pattern or things like that, but there will be some restrictions, there will be some notions which will be followed by all these languages, or there can be certain patterns like if A and B is present in a language, then it is probable that C is also present, for example. But if A and B is not present in a language, then there are chances that C is also not present in the language. So, these things, these are the possible combinations which we want to explore by studying different languages. I will come down to more concrete examples in the following slides. We can also predict features which are possible and which are not. So, as I mentioned that when we see a language like X for example, and we say that X language has A and B features. So, now based on our earlier studies we can predict that the languages which has X and B generally have a tendency of having C feature. So, I can say that X language has A and B, that means it will also have, it may have, or there are high chances that it will have C feature as well. On the contrast, if I see if I study a Y language and I see that there is B feature is there, but A feature is missing in the language, then I can say that because A and B when both are present, then only we see the possibility of C being a feature of a language. So, in this case, in the case of Y language, A feature is not there, that is why we can say that there are high chances C feature will not be there, because only B feature is there, A and B combination is not there. So, these are some of the ways how we find or try to find out at the look at the constraints and also want to predict features. Because the features and the constraints they are limited, we know that there are different languages, but when we look at the universal features or parameters, we do see that there are patterns which are actually common among these diverse languages. The patterns or the features which are also called the parameters. So, there are certain restrictions or there are certain things which are possible. When one is possible, then only the other is possible, things like that. Though we do not talk in absolute terms in typology, we generally say there are high chances, or we look at the statistics and we say that there are more probability of certain constraints or certain features to be part of a language. But since we can't study all the languages of the world, dead and alive, that is why we generally do not talk in absolute terms. We generally do not say that all the languages which have A and B will also have C, because there can be languages which are yet to be discovered, which has only A and C, no B. So, we generally do not talk about absolute in absolute terms. So, in linguistic typology, we study some set of diverse languages that leads us to make predictions for almost all the languages of the world, almost all, not all of course. So, what we can study 100, 1000, 800 languages, and then we find the pattern, the common pattern, and based on that we can predict about the other 1000 languages which we have not studied, because the pattern tells us a lot. So, as I mentioned that these patterns, these features are limited, we can have a we can make our predictions, or we can say also about the unknown or not explored languages, that if this language has these pattern, then there are chances that other features will be a part of it. So, thus linguistic typology studies properties of different languages in order to find the uniformity and universal features of the language. So, by studying different languages, actually typologists want to look at the commonness which binds them all, or when we say language, we, as I mentioned, that there are some common notions, there are some uniform features. So, what are those? What are the constraints? What we can think that this can never happen in a language? So, we know that all the languages have vowel and consonants, for example. So, now we can't think of a language, it might be unknown to us, a language which has not yet been discovered and all, but still we can say that those unknown languages also have vowels and consonants, because we know all the languages have vowels and consonants. So, like that, this was a very basic one, but of course, we take it to higher level, and then based on that we want to make our predictions, we want to tell about the other languages by looking at the uniformity. So, now I hope you have already been introduced to generative grammar, you have a basic idea about that. So, some of the scholars have compared generative grammar with typology, because by now you must have understood that both have actually a common aim of knowing language universals. Both aim for that, both wants to explore or reach to that language universals. So, some scholars I have mentioned have already compared generative grammar with linguistic typology, because both the fields or subfields actually have a common aim or common goal, but their methods are different. They aim to reach somewhere, but through different paths. So, generative grammar follows more of a deductive method, while typology follows more of a inductive method. So, how they are different? In generative grammar, a hypothesis is proposed and data is observed. So, based on that, so there is an hypothesis and data, we will try to fit the data in it, we will see whether it fits or it does not. If it does not, then that means we will have to change the hypothesis. But in typology, what we do? We first look at the data, we explore the data, and then based on that make different generalizations. So, generative grammar is mostly qualitative in nature. So, it looks at the maybe a generative grammar, once someone who is working on generative grammar will work with 2, 3, 10 languages at a time. But a typologist can work for like 1000 languages at a time, because it involves both qualitative and quantitative methods. Nowadays, we see lots of statistical methods being used in typological work. Moreover, there are also works, computational typology is again flourishing, where computational methods are used to study typology, because typology involves both qualitative and quantitative methods. So, quantitative methods have proven helpful in linguistic typology to establish the universals, because if we study say only 10 languages, and based on that we give a hypothesis that if A and B are present in a language, then C is also present. So, I am saying that based on just by studying 10 languages. But maybe these 10 languages are spoken in a particular area, and that means that these 10 languages share an areal feature. So, because they are spoken in the same area, they are in contact with each other, that is why this feature has been shifted, or there has been borrowed from one language to another, and that is why all the languages of that particular area have this A, B, C, all the features. So, based on that, if I claim that if a language has A and B, then only there is C in the language, that will not be very right, because maybe I will look, or there can be languages which are spoken in some other part of the world, which the language is not in contact with these set of 10 languages, and there I can find only C and A and B is not present. So, now again then my hypothesis will change. I can't say that A and B is C is only present when A and B is present, because in those again the other language I can see only C is there, but A and B features are not there. So, when we collect samples, we have to be very careful. At times only studying few language can actually give us wrong result or wrong hypothesis, because these samples can show certain patterns which are just accidental, which can be result of various other things, like because they have common ancestor. So, there can be historical reason, there can be a reason for contact, maybe they are in contact, that is why they have shared the features, they share the areal features. So, there can be various other reasons. So, that can be accidental, the commonality that I am finding is not true, it is accidental. So, a typologist has to very carefully look at the sample of the languages. If very closely related languages are taken, then there are chances that we will easily find common features, but then that will not give us correct hypothesis or correct interpretation. We can't claim based on those closely related languages, we can't make any claim based on that, because they are anyway close, maybe genetically or geographically. So, they are close, that is why they share features. So, nowadays we see lots of statistical methods being applied in studying typology, and then what we see, lots and lots of languages are actually studied, and these languages are not related, they are taken from different parts of the world, they are taken from different families, language families and all, to avoid these bias like or avoid these type of accidental results, where due to common heritage or due to common area or things like that. So, the World Atlas of Language Structures uses statistical methods to find distribution of different features, and it has studied around 2662 languages, and for different features actually the number of languages vary. You yourself can explore this atlas, I have given the link also in the suggested readings. So, you can go there and look at the different features. It is very interesting to see how certain features are present in one language, while those are not present in the other, and how they affect the other features. So, by studying this huge number of languages, we can actually have a idea about the predictions, we can know about the constraints. So, here you can see I have taken this from the World Atlas of Language Structures, where you can see the presence of velar nasal. So, I hope you remember this. So, I have also given the IPS symbol, so that you can easily remember this sound. So, this study is based on 469 languages. So, in these 469 languages, what was seen is that velar nasal is present in only these two, you can see here, and it is not present in most of the languages, that is 235 languages it is not present, no velar nasal. And then when we see the presence of velar languages, we also see that in some languages like 147 languages, velar nasal can occur in the initial position. So, I hope you also remember about the positions which I talked about in the phonology class. So, 147 languages can have velar nasal in the initial position, while 87 languages have velar nasals in the words, but they can't occur in the initial position. So, maybe they can occur at the middle or at the end position. So, about Hindi, if you know Hindi, you know that this velar nasal can occur at the middle position and at the end position, but in Hindi also velar nasal does not occur in the initial position. So, this gives us a pattern. So, what we know is that when velar nasal is present, then also it is not present in most of the, but then it is also, it may not be present in the initial position. So, in lots of languages we see that it is not present in initial position, but what we also know is that when velar nasal is present in a language, then in most of the languages it can be present in the initial position. So, we know about that. So, this is about one feature, you can also explore different features and you can look at it. So, this is very nicely color coded, where you can see that red dots stand for initial velar nasals and pink for the no initial velar nasals, while the white ones for the no velar nasal at all. And when you see this carefully, this map, you also see a pattern, right? That is, in this area we see more white dots. See this area, this, if you take this geographical area, you see more no nasal languages, while we see here it is concentration with initial velar nasal. We can actually see a geographical pattern here, right, and again here we see more pink dots. So, just at a glance, if we look at it, we still can look at the distribution, how same type of languages in one sense, like those with velar nasals in initial positions are clubbed together, while languages without velar nasal positions are again somehow geographically together. So, that of course, does not mean that they are not here, they are also here, but we see the concentration here with a little or minor pink and red dots, right. So, if the study is only based on this part, then one will say that it is more common to have no velar nasal in languages, but when it covers a huge area and when it includes more and more language, then we can actually tell more about it. Our work will not be biased. So, now little bit about the background of typology. In the 19th century, the word was coined, and what happened earlier was that typology was not a different field actually, because people were doing the same thing in comparative linguistics. They were comparing languages and saying these features are in this language, but not in this language. Then there were studies on historical linguistics, which were again looking at the history or the ancestral languages, language families, and then trying to club the languages. So, you might know about language families. I will talk about language families in detail in some other lecture. So, in language families, languages based on their features were clubbed together and also based on their history. So, how they evolved. So, these works were going on, but then typology was made different from these subfields. How? because these studies like historical linguistics, comparative linguistics, contrastive linguistics, they were comparing languages, they were trying to look at the different features, but their aim was not to look at the uniformity or the universal features. What did typology started doing? Typology not only started comparing different languages, because sometimes in historical linguistics or comparative linguistics they were looking at the same type of languages, or in areal linguistics languages from the same area is studied. But in typology people started to explore diverse languages in order to find the diverse features and constraints, again with the aim of reaching to the language universals. And then it was also proposed that there should not be concepts like perfect or not perfect language. So, earlier there was this notion of perfect and non-perfect language, and even today in common man's view you can see that people do say that, oh, this language is perfect or that is not perfect. So, if you are doing this course, I will request you not to use terms like that. All the languages are perfect. Whatever we use to communicate is a perfect language, and our work as a linguist is to describe it, not to prescribe anything, not to say that this is right and this is wrong, or this is perfect and this is not perfect. So, that idea actually came during 19th century in the field of linguistics. So, in the 20th century word order was studied a lot. So, people used to study word order, the focus was on word order, how word orders can actually affect the other features, or if how word orders can actually tell about the other components of the sentence, and of course, with larger phenomena as well. However, during this period we also see Jacobson's study, which is very important, and his discovery was implicational in nature. By that I mean that he studied data and then the universals that he gave was actually can be implied to other languages as well. So, his study was on child language acquisition and aphasia. Aphasia is a disease where, or when it can be a disease or it can happen due when someone is hurt in the brain. So, what happens is that there is some part of loss of language. At times people forget nouns, at times people forget verbs, at times people forget to produce language, but they can understand. Sometimes they can produce, but they can't understand what is being said to them. So, there can be different types of things related to language loss actually. So, in brain some part of the language is lost, some sounds are lost, some one forgets to produce some type of sound. So, this is actually related to language loss, which can happen due to various reasons. So, he studied about this aphasia and child language acquisition, and his study showed that child acquires fricative after stops. So, first stops are acquired and then fricatives are acquired. So, I hope now you remember what are fricatives and what are stops. So, and what he saw in aphasic was that first fricative sound was lost and then stops were lost. So, there is a relation actually. When we talk about acquisition, we see that stops are being acquired first, but when we are talking about the loss, again we see that stops are lost after the fricatives. That may mean that stops are easier to learn and retain in the brain or easier to produce. That is why stops are easily being learned by a child to speak. The child easily acquires the stop sound and can produce it, and at the same time for an aphasic patient it might be easier to retain the stop sounds, maybe because stop sounds are somewhere easier to retain. And again what was also seen, which is related to these two sounds, is that there is no language which has fricatives, but no stops. So, every language which has fricative will also have stop. Maybe because this is the first basic, stop is easier, that is why it will be there, and then only there will be the next step which is little difficult, which is fricative, right. So, through this diagram you can actually look at the relation between fricative and stops. So, you can see how fricatives, one can acquire stops first followed by the fricative, and then fricative gets lost and then stop gets lost. So, somewhere the stops are the base, they are staying there for the more time, they are being acquired first. And if you imagine someone, a child who acquires language and then in his later stage he or she gets becomes an aphasic patient, then we see that stop will be there in her brain for longer period of time, because it was acquired first and it will be lost at the last step. Before that fricative will be lost. So, maybe that has something to do with the acquisition learning process and also the production process. So, we can see a direct correlation between these two. Not direct correlation, rather we can see that or we can say that it is a correlation, because when there is no stops there will be no fricative. So, looking at the patients or looking at the child language acquisition data, this was predicted, which can be applied for most of the languages. So, this is one of the universals that was found. So, similar pattern was also established for velar stops and labial stops. Velar stops also have labial stops. So, languages which do not have velar stops will not have labial stops. Labial stops are required first, followed by the velar stops. So, there will be labial stops if the language has velar stops. And again in aphasic patients it was seen that the velar stops are lost first, followed by the labial stops. So, labial stops again is retained for the more time. Greenberg's work is very important because he talked about 6 linguistic universals. 3 of them talks about concerned existence and the other 3 about concerned probabilities. So, concerned existence is about the existence, and probabilities, like looking at those features, others can be predicted. So, Greenberg's contribution is considered to be of high importance. He talked about the 6 possible word order. So, when we talk about SOV, S stands for subject, O for object and V for verb, we can see that these are actually basic component of a language. So, we talk about subject, object and verb, and of course, we can add more to it, direct object, indirect object and adjuncts and other things, but this is a basic simple sentence. So, we look at that. And Greenberg said that there can be only 6 possible combinations, which is true. So, for SOV, can you think of any other pattern other than these 6? No, right. So, among these 3, what was seen was that these 3 are the most dominant word orders. That means that these 3 are the most common ones, and based on that various other things can be predicted, like in SVO word order more commonly prepositions, more commonly they have prepositions, and the nouns are followed by the adjective. So, we have the adjective and then we have the nouns. So, SVO, can you think of a language which is SVO? I think that is very easy. English is an SVO language. So, I can say I ate a mango. So, I subject, ate verb, mango is the object. So, I ate a mango. So, here what do we see? We see that the adjective comes before the noun. Nouns are followed by the adjective. So, I will say a red dress, blue book, right. So, the adjective will be followed by the noun. So, these are again common features which we found in SVO languages, whereas it is uncommon to find postpositions. So, prepositions are those which come before the noun. So, I will say the book is on the table. Table is the noun, on will come before the noun. So, we will call it preposition. Postpositions are those, in most of the Indian languages we have postpositions, where this marker comes after the noun. So, if you can think of your language, you need to translate this sentence, the book is on the table, and you mark the on thing whether it is coming before the table or after the table. So, if it is coming after the table, then that means it is a postpositional language. So, it was seen that it is uncommon to find postpositions and nouns following adjectives in SVO language word order, right. So, SVO languages generally have prepositions, they do not have postpositions. Nominal subjects in most of the world's language precedes the verb. So, the subjects actually precedes the verb, that was also seen. So, in your language, whatever language you speak, try to find out the word order for the basic sentence, like simple sentences like I gave you, I ate a mango, the book is on the table, she gave me a dress. So, about these sentences, what are the word orders, and then to try to explore whether your language has a preposition or a postposition. So, these are some of the suggested readings, please go through them, and I will again request you to explore this world at last of language structures, that is very interesting. I hope you enjoyed today's class. Thank you.